My name is Leo Vance. I grew up in a place that tourists mistake for a postcard, a small lakeside city in the Pacific Northwest called Port Blossom. Our house, the Vance family seat for 3 generations, sat on a bluff overlooking the slate-gray waters of Lake Serene. It was a sprawling cedar and stone structure, smelling of old money, wood smoke, and the damp, earthy scent of the surrounding forest. From my bedroom window, I could see the mists rise off the water in the morning and watch the sun set behind the jagged peaks of the Cascade Mountains in the evening. It was a beautiful prison. My grandfather, Arthur Vance, built this world. He was a titan in the local timber industry, a man who had carved an empire from the ancient forests that hemmed our town. He was a patriarch in the oldest sense of the word, a figure of granite and will who believed that character, like a diamond, was formed only under immense pressure. His philosophy was the bedrock of our family, and it had one central, brutal tenet, a tradition he called the reckoning. It began after my grandfather's own father lost the family's first fortune in the Great Depression. He was a soft man in a hard world, Grandfather Arthur would tell us, his pale blue eyes, sharp as chips of ice, scanning our young faces. He didn't have the fortitude to endure. The world is an unforgiving place. It will test you, and if you are found wanting, it will break you. No Vance will be found wanting again. And so, every Sunday afternoon, from the age of 12 until 18, the male cousins of my generation would gather in the old boathouse at the edge of the property. The boathouse was a relic from a gentler time, its cedar planks weathered to a silver gray, the faint scent of gasoline and lake water clinging to its cavernous interior. But for us, it was a place of dread. Inside, a space had been cleared, and 2 boys would be called to stand within it. The goal wasn't to bleed, not explicitly. It was to force a submission, to make your opponent yield through pain or exhaustion until he could no longer continue. The boy who remained standing was the victor. The victor earned his place at the Sunday family dinner that evening, a feast of roasted meats and rich desserts served in the grand dining room. The loser and his immediate family ate bread and water at a small, separate table in the kitchen, a public shaming that was, in many ways, worse than the physical pain. My uncles, my father included, enforced this tradition with a grim sense of duty. They had all been through it themselves. They saw it as a necessary crucible, a way of forging the Vance resilience that grandfather so prized. They spoke of their own reckonings with a strange, nostalgic pride, as if the scars they carried, both seen and unseen, were medals of honor. I was a quiet boy, more comfortable with books and sketch pads than with the rough-and-tumble games my cousins played. The thought of the boathouse loomed over my childhood like a gathering storm. On my 12th birthday, the storm broke. "Time for your first lesson, Leo," my father said, his hand on my shoulder feeling less like a gesture of support and more like the grip of a guard leading a prisoner. The boathouse was cold, even on a summer afternoon. The air was thick with the nervous energy of a dozen boys, some nursing the subtle aches of past reckonings, others watching with the morbid curiosity of those who had not yet been called. My opponent was my cousin, Daniel. He was 12 too, his face pale, his eyes wide with the same terror that was constricting my own chest. The men, my grandfather, my father, my uncles, formed a silent, imposing wall around the cleared space. Grandfather Arthur stood at the head, his arms crossed over his chest, his expression unreadable. "Begin," he said, his voice echoing in the hollow space. Daniel and I circled each other, 2 small satellites of fear. Neither of us wanted to throw the first punch. We were friends. We'd spent the previous day building a fort in the woods behind the house. "Don't disappoint me, Leo," my father's voice cut through the silence. So I moved. It wasn't a fight so much as a clumsy, desperate scramble. We grappled, we flailed, we fell. I remember the sharp, acrid smell of dust and the splintery feel of the old wooden floor against my cheek. I don't know how long it went on, but I remember the moment it ended. Daniel was on the ground, gasping for air, a thin trickle of blood coming from his lip where his teeth had cut the inside. He whispered the word enough. That night, I sat at the grand mahogany table, the rich scent of roast chicken filling my senses. Across the cavernous room, through the swinging door to the kitchen, I could see Daniel sitting with his parents, a single slice of bread on his plate. He wouldn't look at me. I felt a wave of nausea roll through me, and the food on my plate turned to ash in my mouth. I had one, but I felt utterly defeated. I hated the satisfaction I saw in my father's eyes. I hated the approving nod from my grandfather. Most of all, I hated myself. The months that followed chipped away at the softness in all of us. We learned to see each other not as cousins or friends, but as obstacles. My younger brother, Sam, was small for his age, gentle and bright. His reckoning, when he turned 12, was against our cousin Julian, who was 14 and already built like a young bull. Julian was grandfather's prize pupil, a boy who had learned the lessons of the boathouse all too well. He fought with a cold, efficient brutality that was terrifying to watch. That Sunday, I watched Julian systematically dismantle my brother. It ended when Sam, trying to back away, tripped and hit his head on the corner of an old wooden crate. The sound was sickeningly dull. He lay still. For a moment, the world stopped. Even grandfather looked concerned. Sam was carried up to the house, and the family doctor, a man who played golf with my grandfather every Tuesday, was called. He diagnosed a severe concussion and a fractured wrist. "Boys will be boys," he'd said, patting my father on the back. A bit of roughhousing. Sam was spared from the kitchen table that night, but the damage was done. For weeks, he was quiet and withdrawn, the light in his eyes dimmed. He had nightmares. Seeing him like that, so diminished and afraid, broke something open in me. The quiet resentment I'd been nursing hardened into a cold, clear resolve. This had to stop. The answer came from the most unlikely of places, my high school drama class. Our teacher, Mrs. Albright, was a vibrant woman who believed theater could save the world. We were rehearsing a scene from a Shakespearean play that involved a sword fight. The key, she explained, her eyes sparkling, is to sell the performance. It's not about actually hitting each other. It's about trust, timing, and making it look real. It's a dance. You create the story of a fight without the reality of the pain. A tiny flame of an idea flickered to life in my mind. I started observing the reckonings with a new purpose. I wasn't just watching the violence, I was studying the choreography of it. I saw the patterns, the expected rhythms of a fight. I saw how much of the men's judgment was based on the appearance of struggle. I approached my cousin Ben first. He was thoughtful and pragmatic, and I knew he hated the tradition as much as I did. I found him skipping stones on the lake one afternoon. What if we could control it? I asked him, my voice low. What if we could decide who wins and who loses before we even step into the boathouse? I explained my idea, borrowed from Mrs. Albright's stage combat lessons. We would choreograph our fights. We'd make them look brutal, full of dramatic stumbles, near misses, and pained expressions. We'd communicate with subtle gestures, a tap on the shoulder, a specific grip, to signal the next move. We would end it with a convincing, predetermined submission. It was a risk, but the alternative, years more of the same, was unbearable. Ben agreed. We secretly taught the system to a few others we trusted, including Sam and, hesitantly, Daniel, who was still haunted by our first fight. We created a rotation, ensuring that the boys whose families were struggling the most, whose fathers were between jobs, or whose mothers were quietly selling jewelry to make ends meet, were the ones who won and ate at the main table. For almost a year, it worked. A fragile peace settled over our Sundays. The boathouse was no longer a torture chamber, it was a stage. We were actors in a grim play, but we were in control of the narrative. Sam started smiling again. We were a brotherhood, not of suffering, but of conspiracy. We were protecting each other in the only way we knew how. The illusion, however, was too perfect to last. Grandfather Arthur had an eye for detail, the same eye that could spot a flaw in a timber contract from 50 paces. He began to watch us more closely. I remember one Sunday after a particularly dramatic fight between me and Ben. I had won. At dinner, Grandfather stared at Ben, who sat at the kitchen table. "You took a hard fall today, Benjamin," he said, his voice deceptively casual. "On your shoulder. Yet you're not favoring it. There are no bruises on your face. You boys are healing remarkably fast these days." A cold silence fell over the dining room. I kept my eyes on my plate, studying the pattern of the gravy as if it held the secrets of the universe. We thought he might let it go, but grandfather never let things go. The following Sunday, everything changed. As we filed into the boathouse, we were met not by the usual grim silence, but by a new, active sense of menace. My uncle stood at the door, patting us down, checking our pockets, our shoes. Grandfather stood in the center of the room. "There has been a rod of deception in this family," he announced, his voice like cracking ice. "A conspiracy of weakness. Today, the reckoning is restored to its true purpose." He called up two of the younger boys, cousins who were not part of our secret alliance. "There will be no submission," grandfather commanded. "You will fight until I say stop." What followed was sickening. It was a raw, desperate brawl, fueled by fear. Grandfather let it go on far too long, until one of the boys was sobbing on the floor, his nose bleeding freely onto the dusty planks. He made his point. He had taken back control. That night, my father cornered me in the hallway. "He knows it was you," he said, his face a mask of anger and fear. "He knows you were the ringleader. Your next reckoning, he's going to make an example of you, Leo. You either fight like a man, or I swear, he'll break you for good." I felt a surge of something I hadn't felt before, not fear, but a white-hot, clarifying anger. The deception had failed. The only path left was a direct confrontation. I went in my room, my mind racing. I had no proof, no evidence, nothing but my word against the patriarch of the most powerful family in town. But I had the one thing he couldn't control, the truth. The next Sunday, it was my turn. My opponent was Julian, the enforcer. As we stood in the boathouse, the air thick with anticipation, I looked not at Julian, but at my grandfather. "This is wrong," I said, my voice shaking but clear. "And it's over." A murmur went through the men. My father's face went pale. "I've been documenting everything," I lied, the words tasting strange and powerful on my tongue. "For the last year. Every fight, every injury, every family forced to go hungry. It's all recorded, uploaded to a secure server. The police and child protective services have the link. It's set to go public at midnight tonight if I don't stop it." The bluff hung in the air, audacious and fragile. "We're done being your gladiators," Ben's voice rang out from the edge of the group. He held his phone to his ear. "Yes, operator. I need to report child abuse in progress. 14, Serene Bluff Drive." Chaos erupted. My grandfather's face, a mask of iron control moments before, crumpled. His hand trembled as he reached for Ben's phone, but Ben yanked it away. The distant wail of a siren, faint but unmistakable, cut through the shouting. "You're bluffing, boy," grandfather snarled, but his eyes darted towards the windows. The confidence was gone, replaced by a flicker of pure panic. My father lunged for me, but Julian, surprisingly, stepped between us. "This ends now, Uncle," Julian said, his voice flat. I held my grandfather's gaze, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Check your phones at midnight," I said, my voice cracking slightly. A year's worth of evidence. Then, a small gasp from the corner. It was Noah, Daniel's 8-year-old brother, who was supposed to be waiting outside. He was huddled behind a stack of old sails, holding his mother's phone, the small red light of the recording function blinking like a tiny, accusatory eye. He had been filming everything. My uncle, Noah's father, snatched the phone, his thick fingers fumbling to delete the video. But Noah whispered something that made my uncle's face drain of color. "I already sent it to Mom." The sirens grew louder, then abruptly veered away, their wail fading down a different street. Ben had given the wrong address. A collective sigh of relief filled the boathouse, a sound so full of guilt it was like a confession. Inside. "Family meeting." "Now," grandfather commanded, his authority reasserting itself. We were herded into the main house. The mothers emerged from the kitchen, their confusion turning to horror as they saw the fear and anger on their children's faces. My mother looked at me, truly looked at me, and her face crumbled. The carefully constructed wall of denial she had lived behind for years was finally breached. "Anyone who walks out that door tonight is no longer a Vance," grandfather declared, standing at the head of the long dining table. No money, no support. Nothing. But something had shifted. My Aunt Sarah, Noah's mother, was the first. She gathered her two boys, her car keys jingling in her hand. "We're leaving, Arthur." 3 other mothers followed suit. My uncle moved to block the door. In the standoff, Ben caught my eye and showed me his phone. He'd been recording an audio of the entire confrontation in the boathouse and the house. The battery was at 3%. Our only piece of real, tangible evidence was dying in his hand. And then, the lights went out. One of the uncles had found the breaker box. In the sudden, disorienting darkness, chaos reigned. People shouted, furniture scraped against the floor. Someone's elbow caught me hard in the ribs. The sunroom window. Ben hissed in my ear. Myself, Ben, Sam, and 2 other cousins scrambled through the darkness. We slid the glass door open and slipped out into the cold night air. We hit the manicured lawn running, splitting up without a word. We knew the family network was a web that covered the entire town. There were few places to hide. My phone began to buzz incessantly. Threats from uncles, pleading texts from aunts, demanding messages from my father. We ran towards the 24-hour diner on the main highway, a place that seemed anonymous and safe. But we'd barely ordered coffee when the manager approached our table, looking nervous. "Your grandfather called," he said, avoiding our eyes. "He said you boys are runaways. He asked me to keep you here until he arrives." We fled again, into the labyrinthine backstreets of Port Blossom. Desperate, I called Mrs. Albright, my drama teacher. I poured out a frantic, edited version of the story. She sounded sleepy and concerned, and told us to meet her at the high school. She'd help. But when we arrived, breathless and exhausted, at the empty school parking lot, she wasn't alone. The principal, Mr. Davison, whose daughter was married to one of my cousins, stood beside her, his arms crossed. "Your family is worried sick, Leo," Mrs. Albright said, her gaze skittering away from mine. She had called them. Of course she had. We were trapped. Every door we tried to open was locked by my grandfather's influence. My bank card was declined. Ben's phone had died, our only audio recording lost with it. By dawn, we were exhausted, cold, and hopeless. We saw a news report on a television in a storefront window. Local authorities are searching for several runaway teens, asking the public for help in returning them to their concerned family. The anchorwoman was a friend of my aunt's. The web was seamless. "Maybe we should just go back," Ben suggested, his voice hollow. "Just apologize." It was then that I made a decision. "You guys find a place to lay low," I told them. "I'm going to the police." Alone. The police station smelled of stale coffee and bureaucratic indifference. I told my story to a weary-looking officer who listened with a practiced, non-committal air. He called in a detective, a man named Peterson whose handshake was firm and whose eyes were skeptical. As I recounted the story of the reckonings, the hunger, the fear, his expression hardened. "Listen, son," he said, leaning back in his chair. "I've lived in this county my whole life. I know the Vance family. Arthur Vance is a respected man. What you're describing, it sounds like a family tradition. A tough one, maybe, but not a crime. My old man used to make me and my brothers box in the yard. It's how boys learn to be men." My protests were useless. An hour later, my father arrived to pick me up. The ride home was silent and suffocating. The house was quiet when we entered. Grandfather sat in his leather armchair in the study, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He looked at me, not with anger, but with a look of profound disappointment that was somehow worse. "You have a vivid imagination, Leo," he said to the social worker who arrived the next morning. She was a tired-looking woman named Ms. Albright, overwhelmed and under-resourced. She interviewed me with my parents and grandfather in the room. His hand rested on my shoulder, a heavy, silencing weight. "Has anyone in this house ever intentionally harmed you, Leo?" she asked. My mother's foot tapped a frantic, silent rhythm against mine under the table. Grandfather's fingers tightened just enough. "No," I said, the word tasting like defeat. "Just normal family disagreements." Ms. Albright closed her file. The system, like everyone else, had failed us. That night, I was told I would no longer be sleeping in the house. My room was being given to a visiting relative. I was to sleep in the boathouse. It was a punishment and a message. I was an outcast. I lay on a pile of old blankets in the corner, the chalk-white outline of the fighting space glowing faintly in the moonlight slanting through the dusty windows. The place was haunted by the ghosts of every fight, every desperate gasp for air, every quiet sob of defeat. It smelled of my failure. But as I lay there in the cold, something shifted within me. The rage and the fear began to recede, replaced by a quiet, cold clarity. I had tried to fight the system head-on and failed. I had tried to expose it and been silenced. They thought they had broken me. They had relegated me to the very place of my family's trauma, expecting it to be my prison. But I would make it my sanctuary, my place of observation. I had 2 years until I turned 18. 2 years until I was legally free. They had taken my voice, so I would learn to watch and to listen. I would gather evidence, not for a grand, immediate confrontation, but for a future I could not yet see. I would document everything, not in a journal they could find and twist, but in my memory. I would etch every detail, every bruise, every hungry night, onto the walls of my mind. My war was not over. It had just gone silent. I would survive. And I would remember. The next 2 years unfolded in a haze of quiet observation and feigned compliance. I attended the reckonings, a silent sentinel perched on an overturned bucket in the corner of the boathouse. I watched as new 12-year-olds were initiated, their faces a mixture of bravado and terror. I watched as my former allies, one by one, were ground down by the system, their small rebellions extinguished. Grandfather had won, and he made sure I knew it. He had me assigned to mandatory therapy sessions with a psychologist, Dr. Miller, whose practice was housed in a building owned by a Vance subsidiary. Dr. Miller listened patiently as I recounted the truth, taking copious notes that I knew were being filtered and reframed into a narrative of a troubled, imaginative boy with a persecution complex. My grandfather was building a fortress of documentation around my sanity, ensuring that if I ever spoke out again, I would be dismissed as mentally unstable. My mother tried to bridge the chasm that had opened between us. She would secretly leave me sandwiches and thermoses of soup near the boathouse door. We rarely spoke. Her face was etched with a permanent, weary sorrow. I knew she was trapped, her love for me at war with her fear for our family's security. My father avoided me entirely, his shame a palpable presence whenever we were in the same vicinity. My only true ally was unexpected. Julian, the enforcer, the one who had embodied the tradition's brutality, began to seek me out. He would find me by the lake at night, his face cloaked in shadows. "I'm tired," he confessed one night, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm tired of hurting them. Of hurting myself." He had been indoctrinated so young that the violence had become a part of him, but it was a part he was starting to hate. Together, we began a new, more careful campaign of evidence gathering. Julian, from his position of trust, had access to things I didn't. He would take discreet photos on his phone of medical bills for accidental injuries of his younger brother's bruises after a particularly harsh reckoning. We stored these digital files on a USB drive wrapped in plastic and hidden beneath a loose floorboard in an abandoned fishing shack miles down the shore. It was a small, desperate archive of our family's pain. As my 18th birthday approached, a new, chilling announcement was made at a family dinner I was required to attend. Grandfather Arthur, in his magnanimous way, declared that to mark my transition into manhood and my departure from the family home, I would be given one final reckoning. A farewell. "He will have the chance to leave with honor," Grandfather proclaimed, his eyes sweeping over the family. "To prove, once and for all, that he understands the lessons of resilience." The whispers started immediately. Who would be my opponent? It would have to be someone significant, someone to make a statement. I knew, with a dreadful certainty, who it would be. Daniel. The cousin I had faced in my very first reckoning. The boy who had started as my co-conspirator and who, over the past 2 years, had slowly but surely been molded into one of Grandfather's most fervent disciples. He saw the tradition now as I once saw my grandfather, as an infallible source of strength. The symmetry was poetic in its cruelty. A final, public breaking to ensure that the rebellion I started would be well and truly dead. The week before my birthday, the extended family began to arrive. Cousins I hadn't seen in years, men now in their 20s and 30s, returned to Port Blossom for the event. They were the system's success stories, their own youthful traumas burnished into fond, character-building memories. They slapped Daniel on the back, offering him advice, treating him like a champion heading into the ring. The night before my birthday, I sat in the fishing shack, the small USB drive cold in my hand. Julian was with me. "What are we going to do?" he asked. "He's going to hurt you, Leo. For real this time." I looked out at the dark, placid water of the lake. For 2 years, I had survived by being invisible. I had played their game by refusing to play. I had absorbed the humiliation, the isolation, the accusations. I had learned to respect my own resilience, a quiet, internal strength that had nothing to do with my grandfather's brutal definition of the word. I had established a boundary inside myself that they could not cross, no matter what they did to my body. "I'm not going to fight him," I said, my voice steady. "I'm not going to give them the show they want." My 18th birthday dawned gray and overcast. The boathouse was crowded, the air thick with a sick, festive anticipation. It had been decorated, bizarrely, with crepe paper streamers in the Vance family colors of dark green and gray. Grandfather sat in a high-backed chair, like a king holding court. Daniel stood opposite me in the cleared space. He looked tense, focused, his eyes burning with a zealot's fire. He truly believed this was for my own good, that this pain was a form of salvation. "Begin," Grandfather commanded. Daniel came at me, fast and aggressive. But I did not meet his attack. I simply moved. I evaded. I dodged and weaved, my body remembering the lessons of Mrs. Albright's stage combat class, but for a different purpose now. Not to create a fake fight, but to create no fight at all. I was a ghost in the ring, a phantom he could not touch. The crowd grew restless. Shouts of "fight back" and "stop running" echoed off the walls. Daniel's frustration mounted. His movements became wilder, sloppier. He was a warrior without a war, his training useless against an opponent who refused to be an opponent. He lunged, a desperate, clumsy rush, his balance compromised by his own anger. At that moment, as if by some silent cue from the universe, Julian, who was standing near the edge of the circle, stumbled. He knocked over a metal bucket filled with water for cleaning the floors. The water sloshed across the wooden planks, right in Daniel's path. His foot hit the wet patch, and he went down, hard. His arm twisted beneath him, and a sharp crack echoed through the suddenly silent boathouse. Daniel lay on the floor, his face a mask of shock and pain, staring at the unnatural angle of his forearm. Blood, from a scrape on his elbow, began to pool on the gray wood. Blood had been spilled. A victor, by technicality, had been declared. The reckoning was over. The perfect, symbolic ceremony my grandfather had orchestrated had collapsed into a clumsy, pathetic farce. I walked over and knelt by Daniel's side, helping him sit up. He looked at me, his eyes filled with confusion, the zealotry extinguished and replaced by simple, human pain. That night, for the first time in 2 years, I sat at the main dining table. A plate of roasted lamb and potatoes was set before me. Across the room, in the kitchen, Daniel sat with his family, his arm in a sling, a plate of bread before him. The victory was hollow, absurd. The entire tradition had been exposed in that moment for what it was, a set of arbitrary, brutal rules that had been defeated not by strength, but by a slip on a wet floor. After the tense, silent meal, my grandfather summoned me to his study. He looked smaller behind his large mahogany desk, older than I had ever seen him. The fire in his eyes had banked to dull embers. "You won," he said, the words heavy with disgust. "But you didn't win. You made a mockery of it all." He paused, looking at his hands. "Get out," he said, his voice quiet, devoid of its usual power. "Take your car. There is some money your father set aside for you. I won't stop it. But you are no longer a Vance. Never come back." I walked out of the study, out of the grand house, and did not look back. I got into my old car and drove away from Port Blossom, the headlights cutting a path through the darkness. I didn't know where I was going. The USB drive was in my pocket, a testament to a battle I had both lost and won. A year later, on a quiet evening in the small apartment I rented in a city hundreds of miles away, I received a call from Julian. "Things are different here," he said. "Your grandfather is quieter now. He hasn't held a reckoning since you left. Some of the younger boys, when their time comes, they're starting to refuse. They just say no. Your name comes up sometimes. A quiet story they tell." We talked for a while longer, a gentle reconciliation across the miles. After we hung up, I stood at my window, looking out at the city lights, a landscape so different from the dark lake and mountains of my youth. I hadn't destroyed the tradition, not completely. But I had planted a seed of doubt, a crack in the foundation of fear. I had learned that true strength wasn't about enduring pain inflicted by others, but about having the courage to define your own worth. I had walked out of that house with nothing but myself, and for the first time in my life, I knew it was enough. The scars remained, but they were mine now, part of a story I was finally free to write for myself.